Well, it's been a big week here in Canada. Thanks for joining. This is the Russ Matthews Show. And the big talk of the town as of late has been this impending trade war, people are calling it. You've heard about this. The trade war between Canada and the US. It's an awful thing, really, right? Big impacts are going to come from this. Now, I want to talk to you about how it looks like the government of Canada could actually want this trade war. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but there's reason to believe that actually this might help them out and they could be incentivized to push for this kind of trade war. There are ways that people stand to benefit, just not you or me. Uh, and it all is tied into these rumored pandemic style benefits, the $2,000 payments that we could be seeing come back. You remember them from CRB, these benefits that came out during the pandemic. Well, this week, big talk on these types of things coming back, and it could be related to these tariffs. Well, it certainly is related to these tariffs, but they might be more interconnected and linked than you previously thought. Because with these tariffs and this trade war, well, the big problem that the US is saying is a big problem is fentanyl. Fentanyl entering the US, killing people worldwide. It's a crisis everywhere, right? But these two countries, Canada and America, entirely disagree with how big of a problem this is and what Canada's role in it is and how big of a role Canada is playing in that worldwide disaster. You can say hundreds of thousands of people are dying from this. It should be a topic that we're at least thinking about. But there's a big disagreement here between America and Canada. And even if we were to come to an agreement on this, it seems that the economic damage that's inevitable from tariffs, even if we solve this first problem, well, it seems like there could be more coming down the road. We're going to get into all of that today. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of stuff that's not being talked about as much as I think it should be. So that's why we've got to get into it here on this show. A longer format show than the other videos. You should watch those other ones, about 15 minutes long, came out on the channel this week. Big stuff on the Bank of Canada, a lot of financial related stuff that we got into there. We're going to take our time with it today, though. Take a little bit of time, grab a beverage, put this in the background if you can. Listen in, enjoy yourself. Well, I mean, as much as you can when we're talking about shit like this. I want to start with the tariffs though, because a lot of people are saying, well, why would any country do this? Why, like, how could they possibly benefit from doing this? I want to show you a chart here that was released by the Bank of Canada just this past week. Take a look at this. Now, this is something that came out from the Bank of Canada in their monetary policy report, just saying, here are the ways that these tariffs are going to impact people. And at the end of the day, it's going to be consumers on both sides of the borders that really suffer from this, right? They show how companies that trade back and forth throughout different phases of the manufacturing process, well, they're taxed every single time a product passes over the border. So this could be painful for not just companies, but for Canadians. But maybe I didn't need to explain that to you, how this could be painful. But what I think I do need to explain to you, certainly seems like it from the people I've talked to about this, is that there is an idea behind tariffs that could be a positive. An idea that is not just downside for a country, an idea that actually has some upside. Because tariffs aren't just about taxing, right? They certainly are. That's a big part of it. Tariffs are also about what does that incentivize? And this is a situation where it seems like it's short-term pain for possible gain in the future. Now, what is that gain, you may ask? Well, from the US's perspective, the idea is, hey, if we tax all of these other countries via our tariffs, well, then companies will be incentivized to manufacture in the United States once again. Same goes for Canada. If you start taxing imports from all different kinds of countries, well, then Canadian businesses are certainly going to want to trade just inside of Canada and make their products in Canada. Now, that's a bigger issue for Canada because we don't have a very diversified economy. We need to import a lot of things, so it doesn't make as much sense. But from the US's perspective, they're like, hey, maybe there is a plus side to this. A plus size, I almost said. Maybe there's a plus size to this. And this is all very similar, like this benefit of manufacturing stuff in your country. This is all very similar to a big talking point throughout the pandemic. Do you remember this? It was they called it friend shoring, sort of tying it to the idea of reshoring companies and bringing them back so that the entire manufacturing process is in your country. That was all the talk during the pandemic. They said, hey, supply chains, they're too weak, they're too fragile, there's too much geopolitical risk. They pointed to the Ukraine-Russia war, but people are also saying, well, China as well, having all our manufacturing there is kind of risky. A lot of stuff has been said about that. But this is a very similar situation, right? Because in the pandemic, they said, we've got a friend shore. We got to make sure that all of our manufacturing and all of our trade is more heavily based around the people that we can truly trust as our allies. Now, these tariffs take it a step further, saying, okay, we got to bring this all in-house. We got to do this manufacturing ourselves and incentivize companies to build here. Because that's kind of the way that it used to be. At least from my understanding, before there was this extreme push, say in like the mid to late 90s, towards globalization. This idea that you have to interact with the global business community. You've got to trade with every single country that exists out there as much as you can because it's good for the economy. They say that free trade makes everything better. Free trade makes the economy better. It certainly boosts GDP numbers. It makes things better. But I've got a question to ask about that, and I think it's a reasonable question and one that perhaps the Americans are asking right now. This global trade makes things better, sure, but better for who? Better for who? I mean, it certainly helps share prices go up. Right? You think of the companies and how in a global world, well, they can make countries sort of fight to the bottom on how cheap their labor can be, make all these companies compete for who can give the most free or near free slave-like labor, right? Companies get lower manufacturing costs because they're paying people less. This is something that definitely happened as a result of globalization and sending things all over the country, making stops, or all over the world, making stops in all of these different places to make the goods that we end up consuming and using. That's a benefit for companies. Sure, that's going to increase their stock price dramatically because if you can have the same profit and reduce it or have the same costs, or rather have lower costs and sell the same product, well, you're going to make more revenue at the end of the day. So it helps out big companies. And, well, it also does help out the general population as well. It does. We saw this, right? Think of how much a flat screen TV is worth today versus how much it was worth in the 90s, right? A big TV screen, you're spending thousands of dollars on it, where now you can get like a 70-inch TV for $700, $600, depending on what type you get. So that's a far lower price than we would get if we were manufacturing these goods in our own country. So we benefit from that. Like, look at everything else. Everything else has inflated in value, but when it comes to technology, when it comes to some of these even cheaper goods, well, those are lower cost in some cases. So there are benefits there for the general population. But what did we pay for those benefits? And you don't hear this conversation a lot. We praise the good things that happen, but we don't actually look behind the curtains and say, well, okay, in reality, what did we lose to get this? What did we pay for this? And was it worth the cost? I think from America's perspective right now, this globalization may not have been worth the cost. Worth the cost for corporations, sure, but for Americans on average, and for Canadians on average, we went through this globalization as well, because it hollowed out our ability to make things here in North America. There's this fight for cheap labor, and we've got incredibly high labor standards in most of North America. So we're not the people making these things. So we lose the manufacturing, we lose the factories, we lose the middle class jobs. That's a problem. We've seen this divide between the wealthy and the poor get more and more and more and more vast. An aspect of that is this hollowing out of the middle class. And I think that the globalization plays a large role in why that's happening. But it's not just the losing of jobs. It's also could be seen as a national security risk. A national security risk, because if you as a country are not the one producing your own goods, well, then that opens you up to issues down the road. Say a country no longer has as good a political relationship with you, well, then they can leverage that and say, hey, you want this? Well, you're going to have to do this if you want this, right? Because of this trade that's happening. It's the same sort of thing we're seeing right now with the U.S. in this entire trade war. We can look at the oil industry as a little mini part of this. I've talked about it on this show before. We can look at how, okay, we are so incredibly reliant on trading with America because we largely give them our oil, and we don't have that ability to ship oil to the different coasts in order to broaden the amount of people that we trade with. The same can be said for the effect of globalization on the diversity of our economy. Right? Now, I joke all the time about how Canada is an economy just of real estate, right? There's certainly a lot more investment in real estate than there is in R&D and development of new companies here in Canada. But all this to say, do we lose something when we lose our ability to manufacture? Do we lose something when we lose our ability to make things here, consume things here, trade interprovincially? I think we do. Maybe the cost of globalization was worth it for the benefits that we saw, but we got to have that conversation. So with this trade war that's going on, I think we should probably be trying to avoid it, right? We looked at that Bank of Canada chart. We saw how it explains how, well, consumers are going to, at the end of the day, see higher costs. They're going to see higher prices. Corporations aren't just going to eat that and take it on their bottom line. Well, I think they're going to, or take it on their top line rather, take it out of their margins. They're going to pass it on to consumers like corporations tend to always do. So everybody's trying to avoid it. Everybody is trying to avoid the trade war. This is what you hear. You turn on the news and you say, oh, the conservatives are saying we got to avoid this. The liberals and the current government are saying we got to avoid this at all costs, but we're going to threaten what we're going to do if we don't. We're going to shut off your energy, is what they're saying. But to me, it seems like that attitude, at least from some of those parties, may actually be more of a front. It's certainly their public stance, but is it their private stance? I've got to show you a clip. It blew my mind when I saw it, but it also made things make a whole lot more sense than they did before, at least to me. Let me pull this up for you. Let's just listen to, oh, there goes my phone. Let's just listen to it, and I want to know what you think about this.
I think, which is maybe a lot of people don't understand. We're going to have, as a government, tariffs, because if we respond on a dollar-for-dollar basis, it means we're taxing the imports that come back across the border towards us, which means if we're doing this on a dollar-for-dollar basis and it applies to all goods and services, the government of Canada could record potentially $130 billion in revenues next year, which would wipe out the deficit and would, I think, create an interesting question of how you recycle that in the economy. Do you use tax cuts? Do you use targeted targeted industrial supports in order to help businesses in an emergency? Do you help businesses with retooling? Do you want to think about extended employment insurance program supports for training? There's a whole range of things you can do, but I think what's different in this case from any other recession is that the government is going to have money.
That's the clip. Now, do any red flags go off in your mind? Because it's a 5-alarm siren in my brain when I hear something like that. This is one of Trudeau's policy advisors who did this clip. He's saying, well, like, okay, the trade war, yeah, it's bad. But hey, even though it's going to cause a recession, there's a positive side here. There's actually not a bad side here because, hey, well, if we're doing dollar for dollar tariffs on the U.S., well, then certainly we're going to make a lot of money on these tariffs. And who's we? That money's going to go to the government, right? It's not going into the pockets of the people who are actually affected. It goes to the government. They collect these tariffs. Okay, so you're telling me the government now, well, the economy's not doing well, not an insane tax revenue growth. So that's not great. There's not this added demand and this added GDP growth from the exploitation of temporary foreign workers that we can rely on anymore. How are we going to fund the important work as the government that we do? How are we going to fund this? Oh, you're threatening all of these things and threatening tariffs. Maybe we can threaten our own tariffs, and hey, maybe if this trade war actually goes through and we don't acquiesce, we don't decide to do what they want to prevent this trade war, well, then actually that's going to be like $150 billion, he said, $150 billion going to the government as a result. That doesn't sound so bad if you're part of the government. Doesn't sound so bad if you're part of the government because they can be the ones to choose where this money goes. It gives the government more power. And they get that power without paying the consequences for that power. Because it's not them who are suffering the consequences. They just see the benefits. Like, sure, the GDP numbers might be down. Jobs numbers could be bad, but you can blame all of that on the other party in this negotiation. You can blame all that on Trump, blame all that on the US, not take responsibility for it, and then actually get all the benefits of $150 billion in tariff revenue. It kind of seems like a sweet deal if you're part of the government or part of the broader bureaucracy that supports the government because your job is not at risk. It's mostly private companies that are going to be impacted by this, not the ballooning state that we have here in Canada, not the ballooning consultant class. It's not these people that are going to suffer the consequences. So, well, we don't have to suffer and we can get this giant benefit, $150 billion, for which we can choose to do whatever we want with it. We can support our different pet projects. Sounds like not a bad idea, and you don't have to pay the cost. It's just like think back to this. It's just like the effects of the COVID monetary policy that we saw. We talk about this on the channel. It seems like every second breath, right? But the actions of the central banks resulted in inflation. First, asset price inflation that benefited the wealthy, but then consumer price inflation, the inflation on day-to-day goods and services that you and I consume and we use, all this stuff. Well, the elite have to deal with that too, right? The prices have gone up for them on things like groceries, on everything, right? You saw the inflation over the past couple of years. But when you're not price sensitive, well, inflation hurts a lot less, right? When you're making more than you're spending, like many of these people are, when you're making more than you're spending, well, inflation hurts less. It hurts, but the increase there is marginal relative to the increase of your wealth that you may have seen from asset price inflation. This is what everybody said. Even the central bank said, hey, it is the most vulnerable who suffer the most from inflation because They don't have this surplus of cash. When groceries go up in price, what do? You got to cut somewhere else to make money go over here because prices are going up. It's these people that are most vulnerable. And it reminds me of that situation when we look at what's happening today. Because it's the jobs in Canada that would be lost. It's the higher prices that all of us would pay. Those are the costs, but they're not costs being borne by the people who stand to benefit most from this trade war. People who have highly paying government jobs that aren't at risk here. And they now have this surplus of cash to do with what they please. So, all that to say, a trade war to these individuals, I don't think it would look that bad. This is all kind of hypothetical here in my mind, but you listen to that clip that we just heard and you got to think, well, hey, they seem a little bit okay with this. And certainly from the extreme language from the people who are doing the negotiating with the U.S., well, it seems like they don't really want to address the things that would result in the tariffs not occurring. More so saying, here are our countermeasures. We're going to do this with an iron fist. We're going to fight back. Canada first. We're going to fight back. So that's how they're trying to sell it to the Canadian people. But there is another way that I think that they're going to try to sell this trade war to the Canadian people as it's not so bad. And it relates to a video I made just a couple of days ago talking about how pandemic-style benefits could be coming back to Canada. As a result of this trade war, the government of Canada, as reported by the Globe and Mail, says, hey, we need to pass some legislation to support these people that are so affected, right? But these people are going to be affected if this trade war happens. People are going to be affected. So it somewhat makes sense that the government would be like, well, we got to support these people in some way. Just like when we shut down the economy, not for a trade war, but for the pandemic, we supported them. This is the idea behind these pandemic style benefits, which they've been talking about. You remember these $2,000 CRB going out to Canadians who aren't able to work. It was a kind of a shit show, though, right? You didn't have to qualify on the front end. You kind of just claimed it. And then if you weren't eligible, they determined 2 years, 3 years down the line, they'd come back at you and ask you for that money. It wasn't a very well-executed program, a lot of problems along with it. But it did help people. It did help people stay afloat. Now, in that video that I made a couple of days ago, you should watch it if you haven't already. We go into this in detail. I talked about, okay, well, how are you going to fund that? How are you going to fund that benefit program? The COVID one, the first one, I think was $80 billion that it cost for the entirety of CERB, if I'm not mistaken, around $80 billion. How are you going to pay for that? I talked in the video a lot about how, well, that kind of puts the central bank in a tough spot because maybe they would need to print money again to prop up the bond market to allow the government to take on debt in order to execute these benefit programs. But maybe I was wrong here. I think I might have been wrong here because I heard this clip after I made that video. Could it be that the government is going to be like, hey, we can give you these benefits and it's not even going to cost us a dime because we can make all of this revenue from the tariffs. We can support Canadians if we make this money from the tariffs. Sounds like a good deal to many Canadians, especially people who maybe aren't paying a ton of attention to it. In their eyes is like sick. $500, maybe $1,000. Who knows what this is going to be? I doubt it's going to be the full 2,000 like it was before. But this could be funded from the tariff revenue. And that makes it a lot easier to sell to Canadians, right? Because if you can say, well, yeah, we're going to have this trade war that kind of benefits us, but we're going to give you a little bit of the tariff money that we collect. Here's your pandemic style benefits. Well, all of a sudden, that makes it a little bit easier to get the support of Canadians in order to pass a bill like this. And honestly, the idea of giving, like if you have tariffs and you have this trade war going on, and it's going to impact people, the idea of giving Canadians that money directly, I don't think is all that bad of an idea. Sure, you can have the conversation about, well, do you really want the government to be giving people out money? This whole UBI idea about like, okay, maybe that supports people. Maybe it'll be necessary in the future with AI. But what kind of centralized control does that give the government if all of a sudden they are the ones that determine whether or not you get your $2,000 benefits? What different stipulations can they put on that can sort of control you, right? Because if that's part of your livelihood, then, well, certainly you're not going to act in a way that would get that money taken away from you. There's all of those concerns. Yeah, I see those. But at its base, in the concept of taking money from the tariffs and giving it back to people isn't that bad of an idea, with a couple caveats. The first one being, well, it's Canadians that are suffering the effects of this, Canadians and small businesses, companies, things like this. I think that all of the tariff money, if you're going to do this, should be going back to the people. The problem is how there's no good way to divvy it up and to be able to effectively measure who is most impacted, who is not. It would almost certainly be corrupted in how this money is doled out. Not a bad idea from that perspective. Just like giving people money based on how much they were impacted to make them whole. It's not happening like that. That's not reality. Because first, this money that's collected, it wouldn't go to you or I. It'll go to whatever the government wants. And if they're saying, okay, in order for us to sell this trade war, we need to get people on board here. So we're going to give them 20%. We're going to put 20% of the tariff money, which I guess would be, what would that be? Like $3 billion. We're going to put that towards, or not that. Yeah, my math is totally off, but we're going to put the X amount of $1 billion, not the whole thing, but X amount of $1 billion here to sell this thing to Canadians, give them support. And also, well, yeah, that helps sell it to Canadians. It makes it a lot easier to sell it to Canadians. But it's not just to justify the trade war. I think that it's also to justify an election delay. You know, that the Liberals are currently down in the polls right now. It would make political sense that they'd be trying to extend the amount of time before an election happens to give their new leader, probably going to be Mark Carney, time to get to know the Canadian people, capitalize on whatever momentum he builds throughout this Liberal leadership race. It makes sense if you are the government to want to delay the election, allow yourself to catch up in the polls, and then have an election. You'll do better, right? But right now, the government is stuck in a hard spot because the Bloc Québécois and the NDP have both said, well, hey, next time we can possibly vote to have an election, we're going to do it. We're going to do it at the first available opportunity. Problem is, I don't buy it now. And here's why. Especially here's why in the context of the NDP. I think that they're going to flip. And you might say, well, of course they're going to flip. I don't trust this Jagmeet Singh guy. He's just going to delay. He's basically working for the Liberals. This is what the Conservatives have really been pushing. The Liberal NDP, like treating them like they're kind of a unit working together. And I can understand why people would think that, right? It certainly seems that the NDP have been making decisions that benefit the Liberals a lot. Now, to what extent there are backroom deals and other things going on there, I don't know. But if you're the NDP, you frame yourself as, we are the ones that truly care about Canadians. We are the ones who work for the people. We are the party of strong unions, strong worker rights, although some decisions over the past year have made people question that. We're here to support Canadians. We are the party of the people. This is the whole branding of the NDP. So then, if there's a trade war, and you're not doing anything to support the people, well, that's a big problem. All these people are hurting. You need to economically support them, economically help them. Now, the Liberal government comes in and says, hey, look, we got this big 30-page stack of legislation here. Once we resume Parliament in March, we need to pass this legislation because look at how bad things are with this trade war. We can't afford not to help people. And I think that that's going to be something that the NDP can rationalize, or at least believe that they can sell to their base who also is not happy with the fact that there hasn't been an election. But I think that they're going to think that we can reasonably say now that, yes, we said in the past we were going to vote out this government at the earliest opportunity, but now it would be irresponsible of us to do so. It would be irresponsible of us to do so because there is this extremely important legislation that is going to help workers. It's going to help Canada's most vulnerable. It's going to help all of the people that we need to help, all the people that we say are our top priority. It would be irresponsible of us to vote down this government. So we may end up with another 6-8 months all the way to October with an unelected prime minister who steps in for Trudeau. Who knows what happens from there. So I think this trade war is a good thing, at least from the perspective of the government. Why would you want to avoid it? Politically, it gives you something to rally around. It maybe saves your ass from a sooner election. What do you think about that? Is that too tinfoil hatty? Perhaps the proper way to say that is hat-ish. Tinfoil hat-ish. Hatty? Hat-ish? Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking. And if you just follow the incentives, it makes sense, right? Of course, anyone involved would deny, saying we're doing everything that we possibly can to avoid this. But when you look at the incentives, sure, that would be a good thing to say. But it kind of works out nicely for you. But even if they were not wanting this trade war, even if they were saying, okay, we're going to do our best here to not have a trade war, we're going to deal with the fentanyl issues, we're going to do everything that you say, Trump, to avoid this because it's going to be economically disastrous. Well, even if that's the case, it seems like these tariffs may not go away, at least not in its entirety. I want you to listen to this clip. It's from the person who's basically in charge of this tariff situation with Canada on the American side. Listen to what he says carefully. He says, well, yeah, you got to solve these problems, but even if you solve these problems, there could be more to come.
So the big tariff view is going to be studied, and the president launched that in an executive order where he asked the Commerce Department and the USTR to study the tariff model long term. The short-term issue is illegal migration and, worse even still, fentanyl coming into this country and killing over 100,000 Americans. There's no war we could have that would kill 100,000 Americans. The president is focused on ending fentanyl coming into the country. You know that the labs in Canada are run by Mexican cartels. So this tariff model is simply to shut their borders with respect America. If we are your biggest trading partner, show us the respect, shut your border, and end fentanyl coming into this country. So it is not a tariff per se. It is an action of domestic policy. Shut your border and stop allowing fentanyl into our country, killing our people. So this is a separate tariff to create action from Mexico and action from Canada. And as far as I know, they are acting swiftly. And if they execute it, there will be no tariff. And if they don't, then there will be. But it's an action-oriented model. That's not the ordinary tariff. The ordinary tariffs need to be studied and examined, and that will start, as the EO said, in April. Big macro issues with tariffs.
So what did you hear there? They said, well, we're not going to impose these tariffs, these national security, national action, domestic policy tariffs, the fentanyl and immigrant tariffs, I guess you could call it. We're not going to apply those if you handle those problems. But even if you do handle those problems, well, actually, we're studying more tariffs that we could just apply broadly to every country. We could apply to you specifically. Even if you solve these problems that we're saying you need to solve in order to stop a trade war, well, we're still going to implement tariffs. So it seems like this is kind of inevitable. Even if we solve the problem, there's going to be tariffs that are coming in, it seems, or at least they're going to be studied right now. And given the fact that, hey, even if we concede to these demands from Trump, even if we do what they say, well, then it's not going to solve the problem, is it? I understand the hesitance of even wanting to address these concerns from the first tariffs if it means that, okay, well, then we're just going to move on to the second tariffs and renegotiate our trade agreements from there. So I understand why people are hesitant. It's kind of like a slippery slope idea, I guess, right? A slippery slope idea where you're like, well, if we know that there's just going to be more tariffs down the road, even if we solve this one, then why would we do this one? Show that we'll bend the knee and show that he can take advantage of us. I understand that frame of mind, but in this case, I don't really see how addressing these border issues, the drugs and the drugs, I think, are the biggest issue here, the fentanyl. Even if it wouldn't prevent tariffs, why would that be an entirely bad thing to do? Even if it didn't prevent every tariff, well, we can avoid this 25% one that they're talking about, and we'll deal with the other ones down the road. And in the meantime, hopefully we'd route out some of the drug problems in our country that we have today. Doesn't seem like that bad of an idea. The issue here is that the Canadian government outwardly, publicly, doesn't believe America. They don't believe, they have different ideas about, or at the very least, different public stances about how big this fentanyl issue is in Canada. Canada claims that it's a minor problem. There's so many more drugs flowing in from the southern border into the States. Don't look up here at us. It's not, percentage-wise, it's not a big problem. The U.S. claims, hey, it actually is a big problem. Look at these lab busts that we've had in Vancouver and Alberta and in Ontario, these lab busts of people making fentanyl, making meth and fentanyl. Well, we've had these big multi-$100 million lab busts in terms of how much product that they would be able to create. The US says this is a big problem. Canada says it's not that big of a problem, so we're not going to address it like it's a big problem. Because there's all kinds of arguments about what percentage of drugs come into the US from Canada. But what they're not talking about, I think, is the sort of undercurrent here. And that's apart from the manufacturing of the drugs, there is reason to believe that Canada is a major financial hub for a lot of this money laundering from international crime organizations. And if you want to take it a step further, and this maybe gets a little bit more putting on your hat, but it seems to me that it would be likely that foreign states could be involved in that international crime. It certainly would make a lot of money, which you could then use as any given state to pursue your interests. Do you remember this? I want to show you a clip because it's not just me saying this. It's not just me making these wild claims. You might remember October 2024, just a few months ago. The biggest ever money laundering fine paid by a bank was paid by TD Bank. They pled guilty to money laundering in a big way. And this is the announcement from that day.
And now to the subject of today's announcement. Today, TD Bank pled guilty to multiple felonies, including conspiring to violate the Bank Secrecy Act and commit money laundering. TD Bank has also agreed to a $1.8 billion criminal penalty. Combined with civil enforcement actions announced today by other agencies, the United States will be imposing a total of approximately $3 billion against TD Bank. TD Bank created...
TD Bank. It reminds me of that letter Kenny bit. TD Bank? TD Bank? You think I'm crazy if you haven't seen it. But there's been large reports about all of this money laundering and how it's more widespread than just TD and how a lot of this is going on in Canada. Because in order to fund an empire of drug trafficking and all kinds of shady business, you need that money. And you kind of need that money to be clean so that you can move it around and use it for seemingly legitimate purposes. There's been big reports about this stuff going on in Canada and it being a hub for this kind of financial crime, with reporters who have been definitely targeted to make them seem less credible. Targeted by whom? I'll let you make up your own mind about that. But reporters like Sam Cooper revealing what he's calling the Vancouver model, the intricate ways that these international crime organizations can launder this money and then use it for whatever serves their purpose in the future. So we got banks who make a bunch of money from this money laundering. It seems like they're doing it. TD here got caught and got enforced heavily in the States. Haven't seen that kind of action happening in Canada, and you got to wonder why. You got to wonder, why isn't Canada's RCMP, why isn't Canada's national security agencies, why are they not focused on this money laundering that all of our other Five Eyes national security allies are telling us this is a problem? We need you to deal with it. Why aren't we? Is it because we need to be secret about our national security? Or is it because maybe there are people in those organizations that don't want it to actually be handled? Because it doesn't seem to be just a willingness of the banks to money launder. It also seems like there may have been some sort of corruption or compromat, or in other words, blackmail situations here. Now, whenever I talk about blackmail, people are going to say, you're insane. Blackmail, this is just stuff from movies. This is just stuff from conspiracy theories. In the real world, it doesn't happen. You get people like this that think these well-known ideas of something that can be done, these well-known ideas, people think that's just fantasy land. But I don't think it is. I don't think it is. It's an actual practice, not just done by criminals, but I think also done by a number of people. Well, I guess it just doing it kind of, I guess, makes you a criminal, but not just traditional criminals as you think about it. But I think it's also done by governments. I think it's also done by national security organizations. And when I talk about blackmail, I talk about, okay, if you've got people in these organizations, extremely powerful organizations, people high up in the country, be it in government or be it in national security organizations, CSIS, in the States, the CIA, things like this. These are all just groups of people, and they're all groups of people that sort of report to different people higher up in the organization. That makes sense. But these organizations also have a lot of power. So if you're a foreign state or an adversary or anybody, would it not make sense to you that you could get a lot done if you were able to influence the way that those organizations were run? Now, if someone gets into that role and they are truly pure and they are truly serving the interests of the country, wonderful. These organizations, I think, are important. Don't misunderstand me. I think that it's important to have something like this. But I think that there's also an importance in recognizing that these organizations are just groups of people, and groups of people and heads of organizations are able to be corrupted. Corrupted how, you might ask? I've been talking about blackmail here. You might have heard the like these more conspiracy sounding things, the Epstein stuff, the P. Diddy stuff. These are similar sort of blackmail operations in my mind, from what I understand, from the looking into it that I've done. These are things where, okay, if you're extremely powerful and we can get some kind of thing that you wouldn't want out there public, well, then we can hold that over you and get you to act in whatever way that we want. We can change your opinion because you got to change your opinion unless you want this shit coming out. Could that be happening inside of our national security organizations? Could that be happening in Canada to result in us not really handling some of these issues because there are other interests at play here? I think it could. There was this story from 2022 in Markham. You can look this up. Markham Underground Casino. This mega mansion, this palace, 24 rooms. They got there, they found like these giant polar bear taxidermy statues and all kinds of firearms, tens of millions of dollars in cash. There have been reports that have come out that, oh, well, actually, there were both federal and provincial. Markham is just like a half hour outside of Toronto, for those who don't know. federal and provincial people from the government, not the police who investigated this for national security reasons, didn't share the names, right? You can look this up yourself. There is reason to believe that these places were used as an area, bring people here, get them drunk, get them gambling, especially during the pandemic when everything shut down. It's a big party, or serving you shark fin soup, and it's a good place to get some dirt on people. And there's reports out there that government officials were seen there based on the tapes that were secured by York Regional Police. But again, nothing was done about all of that. Nothing was done about all of that. So could it be possible that there are other reasons why this drug trafficking issue isn't being dealt with by Canadian officials, Canadian organizations? Well, yeah, you can imagine a world where that would be the case. So all this stuff is a big factor in at least this first round of tariffs. So Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, that's Melanie Joly. Okay, there we go. That's Melanie Joly. She just went down and talked to Marco Rubio. That's the U.S. Secretary of State in America, of course. And I had to show you this because I find it pretty interesting. You can see the different ways that Joly is talking about this meeting and the way that Marco Rubio is talking about this. We can see here that Joly is saying, hey, we're talking about our border, we're talking about the tariffs, our economy. This is what we were talking about at this meeting. Rubio shares a similar sentiment on his Twitter, if I go to his here, but he also says, okay, we're dealing specifically with China here and issues around their economic practices, where Joly just says, okay, this is more broad. This is more just about our foreign policy here. How does that relate to what I was just talking about? I'm not certain. You can make your mind up for yourself. But it is interesting to see the different ways that they're reporting on this meeting and what was actually talked about in this meeting. Because certainly they're talking about the tariffs. Certainly they're talking about this trade war. Joly seems to believe that, okay, this is not about geopolitical and foreign interference stuff, because we're talking about fentanyl and drug trafficking. How would that have any connection? Rubio is a little bit more forward about it. Now, this isn't so surprising, right? Because the government of Canada right now definitely seems more pro-China than the new U.S. administration. I think everyone can agree on that. Everyone can agree on that, so it's kind of not unexpected to see this different framing around it. But it does get into all of this foreign interference conversation that's been going on publicly for the past couple of years here. And hell, who knows how long it's been going on privately. But it's been a big topic of conversation in Canada over the past couple of years. And when I talk about foreign interference, I'm not talking about one individual country. I'm not only focused on one place. I believe that to some extent, every single major country is doing this kind of stuff, trying to interfere in every other country, at least to some extent, to serve their own interests. Because if you're a nation, why wouldn't you be doing that? It would almost be irresponsible not to. Like, people clutch their pearls and they say, these other countries overseas, they are always the bad guy. We are always the good guy. This is how you sound kind of trained to think, right? But when you think about it more broadly and like, okay, every single nation has their interests and they're going to be trying to do things that serve their individual interests, you quickly realize you can't say these guys are the bad guys, these guys are the good guys. Let's put it into these clear categories in my brain. These guys are the bad guys because they're illegally doing operations on our sovereign soil. But like, can we get real? Can we get real here, guys? Like, every country is doing this. Why wouldn't they? We're likely up to this stuff too. Definitely the States is up to this stuff, getting involved in everyone's business all around the world. But get real. Everybody's doing it. And honestly, in Canada, we're kind of getting our lunch eaten. right? I think you ask anybody, we see a lot more interference from other countries in our country than us actually advocating for our own interests abroad. But this clutching of pearls saying, oh me, oh my, how could this be going on in Canada? How could there be this foreign interference? This is kind of the realist way that the world works. I think people are getting involved all over the place. But all this actually leads into our last story for the day. It's one that's been circulating all week, or actually, I guess just over the past couple of days now. This most recent development. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The headline being Polyev rebuffs call to obtain national security clearance to view top secret information on foreign meddling. This is a story that's been going on for a number of months. Pierre Poilievre is refusing to get his security clearance to be briefed by CSIS, Canada's National Security Agency, about foreign interference related issues. He says, I'm not going to get that security briefing. And at first, that seems pretty freaking sketchy, right? It seems pretty sketchy. To not want to get your security clearance, like, what are you hiding? This is what people are saying. What are you hiding? Are you worried that they'll go through the process to clear you for this this secret clearance, and they'll find something in your past? This is what a lot of people have been pinning on Poilievre, saying, why would you ever not do this? Well, it's important for you to get your clearance so that you can do what needs to be done. This is definitely what people have been saying. It's important for you to get your clearance so you can do what needs to be done in your own party, and so you can know what's actually going on here. You can know what's going on. But I think that there's more to it than that. I think there's definitely more to it than that. We sort of have a little bit of an explainer here. This is coming from Justice Hogue, the person who did the interference sort of commission over the past year. She says, I heard that it poses a challenge for the government if a party leader does not have a security clearance, noting that the Prime Minister's testimony in October said that. He told the inquiry at the time that he was informed about explosive intelligence about Conservative Party members involving significant foreign interference. And Hogue went on to not shine any further light on those allegations in the report that also just came out this week. So Trudeau's saying there is explosive stuff here that Poilievre needs to deal with, and he's not getting his security clearance. They're saying you should have a briefing so that you can act. You need to be able to rout out this mass foreign interference in your own party. This is what a lot of people have been frustrated with Poilievre about, is like, why are you not handling this? He then says, well, I don't want to get this clearance because a necessary part of this clearance is that you then cannot refer to or talk about anything that is in that briefing. In this top secret security clearance briefing, there are very strict laws. You could go to jail. You could be fined in serious ways. There could be some big problems for you if CSIS and the Canadian government determines that you have shared information from your top secret briefing. So Poilievre's like, why would I get this briefing if it means that I then can't talk about it? Which is an okay argument. It's an okay argument. It's not great, right? You don't want to be muzzled. This is what he's saying. I want to be able to keep on talking to the Canadian public. But people will say, isn't it a moral responsibility of yours to go out and get this clearance so that you can deal with the interference in your own party? I understand that argument. To that, he says that there are actually tools that they could be sharing information with him apart from him getting a clearance here. They're called threat reduction measures, something that came into effect in 2015 with the Anti-Terrorism Act. It allows CSIS to actually do these threat reduction measures, these actions to reduce the threat of foreign interference in Canada, reduce the threat of all of these types of negative acts for Canada's national interests. They're able to do these things without that person having a security clearance. They can use a TRM to go tell somebody, hey, this is what's going on. So Polyev says, well, okay, well, why don't you just use that then? Because that way I can still talk about it, but I can take the action. I can get rid of this foreign interference in my party. This is his argument, but it seems not so. Because under the terms of this TRM briefing that was proposed, Polyev would obtain information about foreign interference directed at a parliamentarian, but he would then be unable to speak with the parliamentarian about the briefing unless the government was signing off on his ability to go talk to that guy, whoever, or guy or girl, or whoever is included in these briefings. This is what the director of media relations for Polyev's office said in a statement, saying, hey, I can't even act on this threat reduction measure briefing that I would get. I can't talk about it. I can't do anything about it unless I get the sign off from the government. And if you're somebody in a position of opposition, well, then you kind of want to have tools to talk about this stuff and to act on it at the very least if you're able to get this kind of intelligence, but it seems not so. They go on here, I found this interesting. In the final report of the public inquiry into foreign interference, the commissioner played down the talk about how bad all this was. And she said, although a few cases involving things like attempts to curry favor with parliamentarians have come to light, the phenomenon remains marginal and largely ineffective. While the state's attempts are troubling, and there is some concerning conduct by parliamentarians, there is no cause for widespread alarm. Now, I think that this benefits the Liberal government in terms of the accusations that have been made against them, saying, okay, well, at least there was this big commission, and we found out that there's not actually anything to be extremely alarmed about, if you believe the commissioner, and that it was done accurately. So it helps Liberals in that sense, but at the same time, they're making all this noise about Polyev not getting a security clearance and not routing out the extreme and explosive interference that has gone on in the Conservative Party. This is what the Liberals have been saying, but now Hogue is saying, actually, there's nothing to really be worried about. This report wasn't just about the Liberals, it was about all parliamentarians. So something's not adding up here. Something's not adding up here. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me, given what everybody is saying. It seems to me that I don't know what to think about all this. It seems that there's sketchy stuff going on from both sides. And it's hard to make sense of, but it starts making a lot more sense when you start to think about what are the political incentives of both of these sides. They're both going to frame all of their arguments in terms of national interests and them being able to do their jobs well. But I think when it comes down to it, what's most important to all these politicians, Polyev, Trudeau, everybody, is the political reality. How can I get in power? How can I stay in power? What gives me angles to attack my opponents? What gives me defense to defend myself when my opponents attack me? You got to think this way when you're talking about politicians. So let's look at it from that perspective. Well, getting Polyev to get the security clearance definitely is a smart move for the Liberals. They want to push for this clearance. And it's also smart for Polyev to say no to them pushing for him to get this clearance. Because if he gets this clearance, well, then now the Liberals have the ability to weaponize what he says and hold him to a level of scrutiny that he wasn't held to before. Because now, if he tries to talk about this issue, well, then even if he just gets marginally close to what would be illegal to share to the public, well, that gives you an attack angle. If you're the Liberals, you can say, whoa, this guy is acting against the interests of Canada's national security. He's sharing classified information, even if it's not like important information. If something slips, well, then they can say there have been major laws broken here. This guy should be, all kinds of attacks can come up, right? So in that sense, it's smart for Polyev to say no. because it reduces the attack angles that can be taken on him. So the attack angle for now is, why won't this guy get his security clearance? I understand it to a certain point, but it seems like I understand the muzzling argument of it too, and I'm curious what you think about all of that. But in all of this is the question, how much can we trust CSIS and our national security agencies? Because there's a lot of power in these agencies. And that power is concentrated in these centralized agencies with people that are unelected, yes, and also stay in those positions of power for a very, very, very long time. To what extent are those organizations more powerful than the elected government? Are they? Are they not? It's hard to know when everything's hidden behind a shroud of, you can't know this is classified for national security reasons. It reminds me of central banks as well, right? All of this power concentrated in one place, it affects the lives of average Canadians, but you can't vote on it. And anytime attention is drawn to us, we try to sort of push it away. It's hard to be certain of what these organizations' true interests are. Well, certainly the organizations themselves are looking out for the best interests of Canadians, but as defined by who? As defined by who? The people that are in positions of power in these organizations? We don't know we could find them out, but the general public on a day-to-day basis, we don't know their names. We don't know their faces. They're making very, very big decisions. And who really has the most power in Canada? Is it the government? Is it these agencies? But there are more issues with these organizations, because not only can they stay in power longer, but there's also this it sure is reasonable, but also extremely convenient secrecy around this organization and around these types of organizations, because they can say at all points, if there's a piece of information that they don't want getting out there, if there is criminal activity that they don't want addressed, if there is something inconvenient for the public to know when you're thinking of it from the organization's perspective, well, then that can be hidden, because you can simply say it is against our national security interests for us to share this information. And nobody will ever know what the information was and what it wasn't. So you can make the argument for anything that it shouldn't be shared with the public. And that's a powerful tool, and one that's not talked about. They say, well, we can't share this information because we wouldn't want to upset our Five Eyes allies. This is the organization of national security agencies across multiple countries. I believe that's Canada, America, the UK, and Australia and New Zealand, the Five Eyes. They say, we can't share this information because it would be harmful to our relationships with these allies that are helping us with our national security, and we can tackle things stronger by working together. Sure, you don't want to share intel that shouldn't be out there. But there's already reports coming in that we've already upset our allies here by not sharing information and by not cooperating with all this fentanyl business. I don't know what's going on. I don't know, do you? How could anyone? How could anyone know what's going on here? Because you can always hide behind this guise of national security interests. It's at the very least concerning to me. There's a lot of things going on, and they all kind of touch each other, right? They all kind of rub against each other in this weird way where, hey, all these seemingly disparate, seemingly separated stories, seemingly not having anything related with each other, you kind of follow a path and you say, oh, there's a lot more going on here and a lot more that's connected than maybe you think. At least that's what I think. I'm curious what you think. Let me know in the comments. I can't believe I got through the entire episode without plugging the channel itself. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, especially if you've gotten this far and listened to me drone on for an hour or however long we've been going. My eyes, my monitor's all the way over here, and I can't see how long we've been going for. You see me squinting at the screen. I should just rock some prescription sunnies or something like that. Or, I mean, I guess my glasses too would help. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But subscribe to the channel is what I'm trying to say if you haven't already done so. A click is something that takes 1 second. Hell, you're not even going to see me if you don't want to. It doesn't sign you up for anything. It doesn't put a subscription on your card. It only helps out the channel, so I appreciate you doing that. Let me know what you think about all this stuff. These tariffs, the Melanie Jolie, Marco Rubio meeting. There's a lot going on. We're going to keep talking about it. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep on seeing this kind of content, more to come. Check out the most recent videos on the channel as well. They're each just around 15 minutes long. A lot going on the central banking side of things, and that all plays into this as well. We'll talk about that extensively in the future. But with all that said, hope you enjoyed this episode of the Russ Matthews Show. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.